Party has been one of the greatest institutions in political history, so when its leaders, some of whom remember America's fight against fascism, begin to call an American president a fascist, you know they have good reason. And our number 2 story tonight, that reason stands revealed. They ran out of other names to call Mr. Obama. This is Saul Anuzzi, a former chairman of the Michigan Republican Party, former contestant for the RNC leadership. In today's New York Times, he explains why he is now calling Obamonomics economic fascism. Quote, rhetorically, Republicans are having a very hard time finding something that raises the consciousness of the average voter. We have so overused the word socialism that it no longer has the negative connotation it had 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. Fascism, he says, everybody still thinks that's a bad thing. And if ad hoc, ad hominem attacks sound like the signature of a party searching for a message, consider this. After months of blasting President Obama for spending too much on government, today the Republican Party mocked Mr. Obama for cutting government spending. Mr. Obama at his cabinet meeting today gave his secretaries 90 days to chop $100 million from their budgets. FoxNews.com described it as what amounts to a scene out of Hollywood's version of executive power. Like the main character in the fantasy Dave, Obama appears to be trying to work the nation's books, though the $100 million figure amounts to a drop in the $3.5 trillion bucket. A GOP talking point Mr. Obama addressed at today's meeting.
Thank you. It is, and that's what I just said. None of these things alone are going to make a difference, but cumulatively, they make an extraordinary difference because they start setting a tone. And so what we're going to do is line by line, page by page, $100 million there, $100 million here. Pretty soon, even in Washington, it adds up to real money.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Let's bring in Margaret Carlson, a political columnist for Bloomberg News and Washington editor of The Week magazine. And Margaret, thanks for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Good evening.
They complain when he spends. They complain when he cuts spending. We saw that with defense spending, too. When one party criticizes both A and not A, what message does that send?
Cognitive dissonance. When the president did his $100 million cut today, they called it a Hollywood stunt, and therefore the movie Dave, which, by the way, when you were watching that movie, David, didn't people cheer when the guy came in, Charles Grodin, and started cutting things out of the budget? You know, these gestures kind of count, but, you know, Fox News and Glenn Beck and the rest of them, they know a stunt when they see one after the stunt last week with the Tea Parties in which they're complaining about spending, forgetting that President George Bush was a record-breaking spender without doing any taxing. And by the way, who last week was standing in for King George? Because nobody who was actually affected by the tax increase, which doesn't take place till 2011 and which is only on the top 3% of people, if they'd come out, there would be limos lined up and the valets would be carrying the picket signs. You know, it makes no sense. None of these people that I saw at the rallies were actually having their taxes raised.
I want to get back to this fascism stuff. Is it just this simple that Republicans who oppose Obama's policies lost the policy battle last November, so the only way they can win now is to raise voter consciousness by calling President Obama names?
Sticks and stones will break my bones, and words will never harm me. You know, the part of the population that the Republicans need to get back really don't like the harsh rhetoric, and they don't like the name calling, and they know that. So it's not the road to go down. And Senator McCain and Governor Palin both used socialism during the campaign. It didn't seem to work. So the ratcheting up to fascism, I think people stop listening. It's just too harsh. It's too much. And nobody thinks of Mussolini when they think of President Obama. It cannot. I don't think it can gain any traction in the dialogue, and shouldn't. It
also seems to diminish the actual historical significance of what really happened, the horrific nature of what fascism was. But putting that aside, what happens when fascist loses its impact the way socialist did? What do they call him next?
David, I'm going to leave that to you. Some expletive deleted. I can't imagine what comes after fascism. You know, there was a lot of fuss over just touching the hand of Hugo Chavez, which, you know, I can see where You know, you don't want to be buddy-buddy with Hugo. And yet, on the other hand, should he have taken the book? I heard Steve Clemons, you know, what do? Do you take the book and shove it back in his hands? You know, I don't think Americans want the swaggering cowboy non-diplomacy that we've just had 8 years of. They're ready for something different.
The Times does quote some Republicans dissenting, saying fascist goes too far. If the party lacks message unity because it lacks a leader, how does it go about picking that leader without first achieving unity?
Well, the person who brought up fascism, the former chair of the Michigan Party, who did make it to be RNC chair, whose name Saul Azuni, he, by the way, has joined with Newt Gingrich in his in his group. You know, Newt Gingrich has emerged as somewhat of the intellectual leader of the party. Rush Limbaugh is the person, and Glenn Beck, you know, calling names. This doesn't strike me as the way, although maybe Newt Gingrich is going to go backwards to the days when, you know, he shut the federal government down because he got the wrong seat on Air Force One.
Or maybe back to the days when he needed help paying off that little ethics $300,000 bill that he was stuck with 10 years ago, in any case. Margaret Carlson of Bloomberg News and The Week magazine. Margaret, thanks as always for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, David.